Francisco Benitez, known as Paco, entered the world on December 13, 1963, in Algeciras, a city in Spain. Growing up alongside his two brothers and one sister, he spent his childhood in a town bordering Morocco. Paco received his education at a Catholic boarding school. When he turned 20, he made a significant move to Seville, where his parents, including his mother, whose occupation remains unknown, and his father, a retired nursing assistant, had settled. In 1986, Paco embarked on a new journey by enlisting in the French Foreign Legion, a branch of the French military with a storied history dating back to 1831. During his service, Paco was assigned to various missions, including deployments to the Persian Gulf and Gabon, where he demonstrated his dedication and valor. In recognition of his service, he was honored with the Cross of War and the Military Medal. In 1988, while stationed at Marseille, Paco's path crossed with Marie-José, or Maria José as he called her, a French woman working in bars near the port he frequented. Maria José was a single mother raising 4 children, each from a different father. Paco and Maria José began dating and soon decided to move in together. Over time, their family expanded, and on May 24, 1994, Maria José and Paco welcomed their first child together, Allison, who became Paco's cherished firstborn daughter. Paco was known for his deep love and protective nature as a father, although he also had a history of infidelity. Around 1998, Paco embarked on a tumultuous relationship with Simone de Oliveira Alves, a young woman of Brazilian origin with 4 children. He met Simone in a club, and for some years, he led a double life with her until their relationship ultimately came to an end in late 2004. Despite Maria José's discovery of Paco's infidelity, she chose to forgive him. More than a decade after Allison's birth, Maria José and Paco decided to formalize their relationship through marriage. Their wedding took place on November 10, 2006. This event marked the occasion when Maria José adopted her husband's last name, and they both endeavored to build a harmonious and contented life together. In 2010, Paco experienced another relocation, this time to the recruitment area of the French Foreign Legion in Perpignan, a city situated in southern France. As of December 2012, troubles began to emerge within the couple's relationship, culminating in their separation. Maria José initiated divorce proceedings, driven by a discovery made by their daughter during the Christmas of 2012. It was during this time that Allison stumbled upon messages of affection exchanged between her father and a new romantic interest named Dolores, a fellow soldier stationed in Perpignan. Learning of Paco's continued infidelity, Maria José confronted him, no longer willing to tolerate his unfaithfulness, which ultimately led to his departure from their home. Despite the challenges in his marriage, Paco continued to engage in romantic pursuits. He parted ways with Dolores when she sought a more committed relationship and subsequently commenced a new affair with a familiar face, compatriot Maria Teresa, who worked as a guard at the French consulate in Barcelona. Meanwhile, as her mother navigated the complexities of divorce proceedings, Allison sought to lead a typical life for a young person her age. At 19, she secured employment at a hair salon and nurtured her interests in modeling and beauty pageants, passions that had taken root in her early years. Allison's educational achievements, kindness, and natural beauty had earned her a coveted spot in a beauty competition scheduled for August 2013. Winning this competition would have opened doors for her, guaranteeing participation in Miss France 2014 and bringing her one step closer to realizing her dream of being crowned the most beautiful woman in her country. However, on July 14, 2013, while the French were celebrating their national holiday, a preparatory meeting for the contestants took place. Surprisingly, Allison did not attend this crucial meeting, causing surprise among her fellow contestants and organizers. From that day onward, neither she nor her mother were heard from again. According to Paco's account, on Sunday the 14th, he had driven his daughter to the pre-contest meeting. Subsequently, he returned to their family home, where he found himself embroiled in an argument with Maria José over an electricity bill. Paco stated that he later went back to pick up Allison, and they both returned to their city of residence. Upon their arrival, he discovered that Maria José had packed her bags, seemingly preparing to leave the house with her younger daughter, heading toward Toulouse. This was the story Paco shared with anyone seeking news of Allison and Maria José. A text message sent from Maria José's phone at 5:17 p.m. on that Sunday seemed to corroborate this account. In the message, she informed her eldest daughter, Lydia, that they were going to Toulouse. She found this decision reasonable, given that her sister aspired to work for a renowned cosmetics manufacturer and Maria José was also in search of employment in that town. Unfortunately, this was the last communication received from them. Allison was known for her active presence on social media, but on July 14th, shortly before 5 p.m., her Facebook account went silent. Concern began to grow among those closest to her, especially considering her consistent online activity. After multiple unsuccessful attempts to contact them, a family friend eventually reported their disappearance to the police. Initially, authorities argued that since both Maria Jose and Allison were adults, they had the freedom to travel without notifying anyone. However, the pressure from concerned family members eventually led Paco to make the difficult decision to report the disappearance of Maria Jose, aged 53, and Allison, aged 19, on July 25th. This action marked the initiation of a police investigation into their mysterious disappearance. Investigations unveiled unsettling details. Both of their phones had been switched off since July 14th, and no credit card transactions were recorded. Furthermore, there was no trace of the mother and daughter at Toulouse or the Perpignan train station. Both logical departure points given that they did not possess a car or driver's licenses for independent travel. Interviews with friends and family firmly ruled out the possibility of them running away, particularly in Allison's case, as she was deeply enthusiastic about her life in Perpignan and her dream of becoming a beauty queen. A delegate from the Miss France committee shared in an interview that participating in the competition had been Allison's dream and she had been highly motivated. She also recounted how Allison would frequently call for advice on what to wear in the days leading up to events. Additionally, she emphasized Allison's punctuality and her habit of notifying them if she was running late, making her sudden absence without explanation all the more perplexing. The investigation naturally focused on Paco, as he was the last person known to have seen them alive. Compounding his situation, the ongoing issues with his ex-partner and revelations of his double life made him the prime suspect. Media coverage of the case intensified, and the French public became engrossed in the unfolding mystery. Journalists crowded the street where the family's house was located, and passers-by didn't hesitate to direct accusations at Paco. On August 5th, 3 weeks after the disappearance of his ex-wife and daughter, 50-year-old Paco was tragically discovered deceased. He had taken his own life by hanging himself in the barracks of the Foreign Legion, where he worked as a recruitment officer. Forensic experts determined that his death occurred between 5 and 7 in the morning of that fateful day. Following Paco's tragic death, a series of emails and letters addressed to co-workers and family members came to light, along with a final video that was published on the website of a French magazine. In these messages, Paco expressed his enduring love for his wife and daughter, emphasizing that the burden of suspicion had pushed him to take his own life. One of Paco's last lovers recounted that he had vehemently maintained his innocence and couldn't bear the weight of being viewed as the prime suspect in a crime against his daughter and former wife. French media initially reported that Paco's suicide was driven by overwhelming guilt. However, Maria Jose's brother conveyed a different perspective when he spoke to journalists. He did not believe that his brother-in-law had harmed his family or played a role in their disappearance. He described the last time he had seen Paco on Sunday, August 4th, as a moment when Paco appeared utterly broken. Paco had described himself as a man of honor but with nothing left to lose. During that interaction, he also shared his suspicion that his sister had left their home in a fit of anger and might be in a place where she couldn't easily return due to the scandal surrounding her disappearance. These statements introduced doubt about Paco's guilt and even stirred feelings of sympathy and compassion for the deceased legionnaire. However, the same video and news of Paco's death brought forth a revelation that altered the course of the narrative. This revelation harkened back to February 2004 and pertained to Simone, the woman with whom Paco had led a double life. It emerged that upon learning of Paco's death through the news, Simone's relatives recognized him and promptly contacted the authorities. They revealed that Paco had been Simone's lover for 6 years until her inexplicable disappearance. In connection to this, one of Simone's sisters disclosed that shortly before vanishing, Simone had been hospitalized due to either a spontaneous abortion or an attempted suicide following a violent altercation with Paco. This fight reportedly occurred because Simone had discovered that Paco had not yet separated from his wife, Maria Jose. Tragically, Simone never reappeared, and Paco moved on with his life. As investigators compared both cases, they noted some striking similarities. Firstly, in both cases, the last sign of life from the women involved was a text message sent from their phones, Simone informing Paco that she was leaving, and Maria Jose sending a message to one of her daughters. These parallels raised questions and added a layer of complexity to the mystery surrounding the disappearances. Another notable similarity in both cases relates to the delay in reporting the disappearances by Paco. In November 2004, he waited for several days before reporting Simone's disappearance to the police, a pattern that raised suspicion even though he could no longer be prosecuted for the crimes committed. In late September 2013, a report raised disturbing questions. It was revealed that in mid-July, Paco had purchased a significant quantity of lye, a chemical known for its ability to degrade DNA, making it challenging for forensic experts to detect traces of cleaned blood at a crime scene. During meticulous forensic examinations, officials from the crime lab discovered compelling evidence of a substantial blood spill that had been meticulously cleaned, both in the residence where Maria Jose and Allison lived and in the barracks where Paco worked. Specifically, blood was confirmed to be present in the drainage of a freezer. A fellow soldier recounted that on July 17th, he had assisted Paco in transporting this freezer from his home to the Legion's headquarters. The same witness informed the police that he had seen traces of blood in a clogged sink within Paco's apartment. Moreover, officials found indications of blood in the room that Paco occupied within the barracks and within a washing machine where he had been observed washing sheets and clothing. Other unsettling details centered around the alleged disappearance of approximately 30 bed sheets from the military installation in July. Additionally, there were reports of a soldier who had witnessed Paco using a hose to clean a carpet from which a reddish liquid was emerging, a situation the man had explained as a result of staining while defrosting meat. Despite the high hopes generated by these revelations, the police faced difficulties in conclusively establishing the connection between Allison's DNA and the traces of washed blood or determining whether it resulted from the young girl's contact with the analyzed items. However, her mother's blood DNA was found in the family washing machine. The neighbors also recalled Paco switching his vehicle from a white car to a dark van around the time of their disappearance. The van was subsequently seized by the police for further examination, although initial tests did not yield any immediate results. Nevertheless, the introduction of this new evidence into the case file only served to intensify suspicions of criminal involvement by Paco. As discussions surrounding Paco's possible connection to the disappearances gained momentum, reactions from those who knew the family were swift. Allison's former boss expressed how the entire community was deeply shaken by the unfolding story. Allison had been a beloved and dedicated employee at the hair salon, and her absence had a profound impact on the clientele. To them, it was inconceivable that her father could be linked to her disappearance. An unnamed family member told French media that Allison had been actively trying to understand the true nature of Paco. She questioned why her affectionate father was frequently absent, including during holidays like Christmas. She even harbored suspicions that her father might have had a double life with another family elsewhere and was possibly tracking one of his lovers on the internet. These revelations added layers of complexity and intrigue to the already perplexing case. Maria Jose's brother, whom we've mentioned previously, shared the ongoing anguish that his family endured 5 months after that fateful July 14th. He revealed that their desperation had not subsided since the beginning of the ordeal. He described how his life had come to a standstill, often disrupted by sleepless nights where he would turn to his computer in search of answers. He also expressed deep concern for his nephews, Maria Jose's other children, who had essentially been raised by Paco and affectionately referred to him as Dad. In contrast to his initial impressions after the disappearances, he stated that all the elements of the investigation seemed to point toward Paco as the primary suspect in the eyes of his family. However, he acknowledged that the evidence incriminating Paco was not sufficient to definitively prove that he had murdered Maria Jose and Allison. On the other hand, he remained open to the possibility that Paco might have had an accomplice. This theory arose from the last message allegedly sent by Maria Jose, which was written in impeccable French. He believed it couldn't have been Paco's work, as he struggled with the French language and had poor writing skills. He emphasized that at times when he communicated with Paco, he even had to ask him to rewrite sentences because they were incomprehensible. He vividly remembered Paco as a fiercely protective father who had never exhibited any signs of violence, making it inconceivable to him that Paco could harm his own daughter. He recounted that on the night before Paco took his own life, they spent 2 hours with him, and he appeared utterly devastated, continuously mentioning that he was going to do something reckless. Later that evening, Paco went to have dinner with one of his military colleagues, and when he called him again an hour later, Paco seemed calm. What struck him as very strange was the fact that he had to learn about the disappearances through television on August 1st. In the midst of the turmoil, he reached out to Paco, who explained the disappearance and the supposed journey undertaken by Maria Jose and Allison. Paco reminded him that Maria Jose had left their home for 4 days on a prior occasion. Additionally, Paco apologized for not being in touch and claimed to have lost his contacts. 1 year after Allison and her mother's inexplicable disappearance, the judge in charge met with Maria Jose's brother, who had become the main civil party involved in the perplexing case. In that conversation, Maria Jose's brother was informed that investigations were still ongoing, reigniting a glimmer of hope that someday they might uncover the truth. Following this meeting, Maria Jose's brother candidly admitted that he woke up every morning with the hope of receiving a call informing him that they had been found. Although he had become more cautious and less optimistic over time, he underscored the importance of discovering the whole truth. He had become convinced of Paco's involvement in his family member's disappearance when Maria's DNA was found in the washing machine. He acknowledged that his life had essentially come to a halt since his sister and niece vanished. He dedicated all his time to collecting, comparing, and assembling evidence, driven by an unwavering determination to uncover the truth. Almost 3 years after the mysterious disappearances, it appeared that definitive evidence was within reach, though investigators exercised caution in their pursuit of the truth. During that time, bone fragments were discovered on a secluded beach. The seemingly human bones were stumbled upon by none other than Maria Jose's own brother, who found them inside a plastic bag. He swiftly arrived at the scene after receiving a tip from a witness and immediately alerted the authorities. 5 investigators from the judicial police were tasked with conducting excavations, with the presence of a forensic doctor who played a crucial role in extracting the bones. The discovery prompted the investigation to determine the causes of death. The police announced that DNA analysis would be conducted in the following days, but the expected resolution did not materialize. The family's lawyer held a strong belief that these remains belonged to the 2 missing women. His conviction was grounded in the fact that shortly after their disappearance, it was determined through the location data of his cell phone that Paco had been in close proximity to the location where the bones were discovered. Indeed, in the months that followed July 2013, exhaustive searches had been carried out in that expansive sandy area, all to no avail. The most recent information regarding this enigmatic case dates back to the year 2021, indicating that the bodies of Maria and Allison had still not been located. The family's lawyer, in his assessment, contended that the case had been mishandled from the very beginning. He explained that the initial hours and days are crucial in solving a crime, and therefore, the delayed reports significantly impeded the investigation. In his view, the prospects of unraveling the mystery surrounding the disappearance of Maria Jose and Allison might have extinguished on the same day Paco took his own life, carrying all his secrets to the grave. Paula Ellera was born in Colombia in the late 1970s to her parents, Cesar and Olga Ellera. She had 2 older siblings, Julio and Alexandra. In June of 1990, Paula, along with her mother and 2 siblings, moved to East Harlem, New York City, in hopes of finding a better life. They lived on the 30th floor of an apartment building at 420 East 111th Street, where they stayed with Paula's uncle, Guillermo Ospina. Her father, Cesar, remained in Colombia, working as a taxi driver, and was saving money to eventually join them in New York. Upon their arrival in New York, Paula started attending Junior High School 99. According to her sister, Alexandra, Paula excelled academically, focusing her spare time on studying English and mathematics. She had only a handful of friends, mostly classmates, and aspired to become a lawyer to help those in need. Her uncle Guillermo described her as highly intelligent and mature for her age, thinking beyond her years. He also noted that Paula was very happy in New York because of her love for the English language. She was a young girl with many plans for the future, her uncle Guillermo said. Everything appeared to be going smoothly for Paula and her family, until a heartbreaking event suddenly changed their lives. On the cold afternoon of January 24, 1991, Paula, who was just 13 years old at the time, left her school and made her way back to the familiar surroundings of her apartment building. At approximately 4:45 p.m., she arrived at the entrance of the building and used the intercom to call her apartment. Her mother, Olga, answered and let her in by pressing the button to unlock the lobby door. This ordinary interaction would be the final one Olga would share with her beloved daughter. With the door now open, Paula entered the lobby and stepped into an elevator. But tragically, she never made it to their 30th floor apartment. 10 minutes later, when Paula hadn't arrived home, her brother and uncle grew worried. They felt that something was amiss and decided to go look for her. As they hurried down to the lobby, they found it completely empty. They began searching the neighborhood desperately for Paula, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. 3 hours later, around 7:30 p.m., a man out for a walk with his dog made a chilling discovery. he spotted a lifeless figure lying on a walkway near the East River. The area was littered with drug-related items like vials, syringes, and used lighters. Tragically, what he found was Paula's slender body. She had passed away. The site where she was found was located about a half a mile to the south of the apartment building where she lived. When detectives arrived at the scene, they were faced with a deeply saddening sight. There were no clues to indicate who might have committed this crime. The only things they discovered on Paula's body were a new Kids on the Block watch on her wrist and a piece of chalk in her pocket. Paula's murder profoundly affected not only her family, but also the entire neighborhood. Her mother Olga was inconsolable, struggling to come to terms with the loss of her daughter. At Paula's school, both students and teachers were in shock. In the aftermath of this tragedy, teachers held meetings with students to provide support for those who were close to Paula, helping them cope with their grief. They also advised all students not to walk alone in the area for safety reasons. In response to the incident, reporters were not allowed to access the school, and the principal and district officials declined to speak with them. Detectives were left with numerous unanswered questions. They went from door to door in the 32-floor building, hoping to find witnesses who might have seen Paula in the area where her body was eventually discovered. Unfortunately, they couldn't locate anyone who had seen her there. Moreover, the detectives had no information about the appearance of the person responsible for this tragedy. It remained uncertain whether Paula was killed in the isolated spot filled with crack vials where her body was found or somewhere else. Through their investigation, the detectives managed to piece together some important details. They discovered that Paula regularly stayed at school after hours for a journalism workshop on Wednesdays and Thursdays. On the day of her tragic murder, she had been working on an article about her father, intending to send it to him as a Valentine's Day gift. The detectives also found out that on that fateful day, Paula left the school after the workshop at around 4 p.m. and walked north along First Avenue with a friend. They parted ways at 106th Street, with Paula continuing to her family's apartment building. During their inquiries, the detective learned that another teenager named Aaron Wofford had entered the same elevator as Paula. However, when they spoke with him, he claimed to have gotten off at the 19th floor while Paula continued upward. As a result, the detective shifted their focus away from him as a suspect. The autopsy revealed the full extent of the terrible ordeal Paula had endured. She had been violated, strangled, and stabbed 3 times near her heart. The medical examiner also noticed unusual elongated marks on her thighs. It was clear that Paula had bravely resisted an assault, and her attacker had forcefully separated her legs, causing bruises on their thighs that matched the shape of their fingers. The examiner also collected male hair from her body. This was stored as evidence. On February 2, 1991, Paula's body was laid to rest at St. Michael's Cemetery in East Elmhurst, Queens. For months later, after her tragic murder, Paula's family decided to relocate to Flushing, New York, and they received support from Victim Services, a private nonprofit organization that assists victims of violent crimes and their families. In Flushing, Olga sought solace through counseling at the Families of Homicide Victims program, also run by Victim Services. As the family continued to cope and heal, they held onto the hope of achieving justice for Paula. However, as this time passed, Paula's case gradually grew colder, and the quest for answers became increasingly challenging. The murder of a 13-year-old girl should have been a major news story in any city at any time. However, in the violence-ridden New York of 1991, this dreadful crime in East Harlem was largely unnoticed. Between 1990 and 1992, the city reported over 2,000 murders each year, with an average of 6 bodies discovered daily across the 5 boroughs of New York City. Unfortunately, most of these occurred in impoverished, predominantly minority neighborhoods such as East Harlem, the South Bronx, and East New York, Brooklyn. Regrettably, very few of these cases received significant attention from the media. Instead, the media often focused on more upscale crimes involving white, wealthy victims in picturesque locations. Without the pressure from the media or politicians, Paula's case became a low-priority homicide. Consequently, her murder remained unsolved and largely forgotten throughout much of the 1990s. By the mid-1990s, crime rates in New York City were on the decline. However, in the housing projects of East Harlem, a disturbing trend persisted. A series of seemingly unrelated incidents began to occur, all involving the assault and murder of young, attractive teenagers with large skin, regardless of whether they were black or Hispanic. In 1994, a 15-year-old girl became a victim when she was confronted by an attacker brandishing a knife. This case revealed a consistent pattern used by the assailant, which he would repeat multiple times over the next 4 years. He would approach the teenager from behind and guide her to an isolated location. There he would blindfold her using a piece of her own clothing, coerce her to undress, and then subject her to assault. Remarkably, the 15-year-old survivor was able to provide a description of her attacker. He was a well-groomed young man, with a muscular build, and he displayed in excess a sense of self-importance. Shockingly, he even told the victim that she should consider herself fortunate to be assaulted by someone as good-looking as himself. A few years later, on September 10, 1997, firefighters responded to a rooftop fire at the George Washington houses on East 104th Street. In the aftermath, they discovered the lifeless body of a woman who had suffered severe abuse, had been struck with a blunt object, and was burnt so badly that she was unrecognizable. This victim was later identified as 19-year-old Johias Castro, who had moved to New York from the Dominican Republic with her family. Johias, a young mother with a daughter, had been pursuing her studies in computer science at a community college in the Bronx. 7 months later, in April 1998, a 13-year-old girl was the next victim in the same neighborhood. Thankfully, this young victim managed to escape with her life. 2 months after that, on June 2, 1998, 17-year-old Rashida Washington met a tragic end. She was found in a 15th floor stairwell of an East 112th Street housing project. Having been robbed, assaulted, and strangled, her lifeless body, with its naked torso covered by a shirt, had been positioned in a seated stance against the wall. Similar to the earlier victims, Rashida, a fashion student who worked at a clothing boutique, was petite, weighing only 100 pounds. Tragically, she was murdered just 3 days after celebrating her 18th birthday. In that same year, during the fall, 2 more young teenagers fell victim to assaults in the same area. A 15-year-old was attacked on September 25, 1998, followed by a 14-year-old on November 16th. Thankfully, these 2 adolescents survived, likely because they didn't get a good look at the attacker before being blindfolded. Even as these similar cases continued to accumulate, the police did not publicly acknowledge the possibility of a serial murderer targeting teenage girls in East Harlem. However, due to the concerns raised by the parents of the victims, the police eventually decided to take prompt action. In the 1990s, there was a relatively small database of DNA samples on record because of widespread testing of convicted felons had not yet begun. However, a significant breakthrough had occurred in the autumn of 1998 concerning the East Harlem cases. New York police experts in forensics compared bodily fluid evidence from the Rashida Washington murder with evidence from 2 other similar cases in the neighborhood. These tests conclusively linked the same perpetrator to all 3 crimes. Finally, detectives had solid evidence confirming the existence of a serial criminal preying on teenagers in Harlem. In response, police leadership assembled a specialized task force comprising detectives with the sole mission of apprehending the suspect. The police took action by distributing a wanted poster that included a sketch of the serial attacker. This sketch was based on descriptions provided by the victims. Shortly after posting the flyer in East Harlem, a tipster who called and suggested that the detectives should closely investigate a 25-year-old man known as Ace, who resided on the 19th floor of the same building where Paula had lived. The police quickly identified Ace's real name as Aaron Key, and this name triggered a memory. The name Aaron had initially surfaced during Paula's murder investigation. Detectives recalled the teenager named Aaron Wofford, who had been seen entering the elevator at the same time as Paula and had claimed to have exited on the 19th floor. The distinctive first name, Aaron, had also reappeared in the investigation of Johias Castro's murder in 1997. Phone records showed that in the days leading up to her death, Johias had made numerous calls to a man named Aaron Key. When questioned by the police, Aaron explained that Johias had been a friend of his girlfriend, Jacqueline. He accounted for his numerous phone calls by stating that the 2 women had been planning a shopping trip on the day of Johias' murder. The police also interviewed Jacqueline, who confirmed Aaron's explanation. It was only later that the police realized that Aaron Wofford and Aaron Key were actually the same person. Wofford was his father's last name and Key was his mother's. This revelation connected Aaron Key to 2 out of the 3 victims in the suspected serial killer case. He was the last person known to have seen Paula alive, and there was a significant history of phone communication between him and Johias in the days leading up to her death. These connections can not only have been coincidence. Detectives decided to dig deeper into Aaron's background. They found that he was an intelligent and reasonably well-spoken individual. He was born on September 18, 1973, and he had spent most of his childhood in East Harlem. During the time of Paula's disappearance in 1991, he was living with relatives in the same building as her. Aaron was known as a charming person with a knack for computers. He claimed to be involved in rap music production, although there was little evidence to support this claim. Physically, he stood just 5 feet 8 inches and he was fairly handsome. His criminal record showed only one arrest for robbery in 1990, and he had spent little or no time behind bars. However, neighbors had a different perspective on Aaron. They described him as having a troubling side. He had a habit of peering through the peepholes of women in his building, and he often wandered around with a portable video camera, attempting to capture inappropriate footage. At this stage, the police didn't have much substantial evidence against Aaron, but they understood the importance of a thorough investigation. They focused on the assailant involved in the September 1998 incident, who had left behind a black FUBU cap and a gray sweatshirt. The detectives decided to look closer into these clothing items for leads. Their efforts paid off when they found a laundry tag on one of the garments. This tag eventually led the police to a dry cleaner, located near Aaron's building. What made this discovery even more significant was that the client list at this droid cleaner included Aaron's mother, Cynthia. Every piece of information seemed to point to Aaron as a prime suspect, and law enforcement was increasingly convinced that testing his DNA would confirm his involvement in the crimes. However, there was a significant hurdle. Aaron had no DNA on record because mandatory DNA testing for accused felons in New York wouldn't begin until the year 2000. In the 1990s, obtaining a DNA sample was not as straightforward as bringing a suspect and asking for a swab. DNA tests were still seen as invasive procedures, and acquiring a sample required judicial authorization based on reasonable suspicion. Even though there was substantial circumstantial evidence pointing towards Iran's involvement, detectives were aware that the details like the elevator ride, phone calls, and the laundry tag alone wouldn't be enough to persuade a judge to order Aaron to provide a DNA sample. Consequently, the police had to resort to an alternative plan. Their initial approach involved tailing Aaron Key, hoping he would unknowingly leave behind a sample of his saliva, like through spitting or disposing of chewing gum. However, this tactic quickly proved to be unsuccessful. On February 8, 1999, detectives finally caught a break when Aaron was arrested for his involvement in the theft of a computer hard drive. Since there were no laws mandating DNA testing for arrested individuals in New York at that time, the police had to resort to a bit of trickery in an attempt to obtain a DNA sample. They devised a plan where a female detective disguised herself as a doctor. Wearing a white hospital garment, she approached Aaron and asked him to provide a saliva sample for what she described as a routine tuberculosis test. She handed him paperwork and hoped he would sign a release form. However, Aaron, being cautious, took the time to read the document. When he noticed a line mentioning DNA analysis, he refused to cooperate. He claimed that he was a practicing Jehovah's Witness and that his faith prohibited him from participating in any form of medical treatment. Aaron had figured out what the police were after, and he was determined not to give it to them. After finishing his meal that evening, he tore his paper cup into pieces and flushed them down the toilet. To further confuse investigators, he swapped his cup with that of a cellmate. However, the police were one step ahead. Shortly after Aaron's arrest, he had been in a shared holding cell with several other men. During their time there, attendants had provided them with cups of water. Detectives managed to locate these cups in a waste paper basket and sent them for DNA testing. Within just a couple of days, the results came back, confirming that a sample collected from the rim of one of the cups found in the police holding cell matched the DNA of the East Harlem criminal. By the time the DNA test results were ready on February 12, 1999, Aaron had already been released without bail, as he was only facing a misdemeanor charge related to computer theft. Meanwhile, the New York Police Department offered an $11,000 reward for any information that could lead to his arrest. Authorities soon discovered that Aaron had traveled to Brownsville, Brooklyn, and met up with his 16-year-old girlfriend named Angelique Stalin. Her parents believed that they were going on a Valentine's Day date. However, instead of sticking to their plans, Aaron and Angelique boarded a bus headed for Florida from Newark, New Jersey. Detectives grew concerned that Angelique might be in danger, potentially facing the same fate as the previous victims. After Aaron arrived in South Florida, he made 2 phone calls to another girlfriend back in New York. By this time, news of his status as a suspected serial killer on the run had made headlines. The second girlfriend, aware of the situation, promptly contacted the police and provided a tip that Aaron was staying at the Miami Sun Hotel, located just 2 blocks from the beach, on Northeast 1st Avenue in downtown Miami. Responding to this tip, 2 New York detectives rushed to the hotel and began surveilling it. When they spotted Aaron and Angelique walking around inside, they called a Miami-Dade SWAT team for assistance. The SWAT team stormed the building and discovered Aaron and Angelique hiding under the bed on the hotel's 6th floor. And on February 19, 1999, Aaron was apprehended and placed in custody. When detectives attempted to interrogate Aaron about the East Harlem crimes, he remained silent and didn't provide any information. However, the police had a plan. They later observed and listened from behind a two-way mirror as they allowed Angelique into the interview room. Aaron and Angelique believed they were having a private moment to say their goodbyes. During this conversation, Angelique pressed Aaron to explain why he had committed the crimes. Aaron's response was cryptic. He mentioned that he had bugged out and claimed to have had a sickness. After a lengthy 4-month legal battle, Aaron was eventually extradited to New York to face trial on 22 felony charges related to 4 assaults and the murders of Paula Hilera, Johias Castro, and Rashida Washington. DNA evidence connected Aaron to 6 out of the 7 cases. During the trial in the fall of 2000, prosecutors John Irwin and Richard Plansky presented a powerful case. With a barrage of testimonies and DNA evidence against Aaron, they called upon 130 prosecution witnesses, including 2 of Aaron's victims. Aaron himself insisted on being the first defense witness to take the stand. Over the course of 2 days of testimony, Aaron displayed a range of emotions, from giggling like a schoolgirl to crying like a baby. He also expressed his anger at being prosecuted. His monologue, which was largely uninterrupted by the judge, prosecutors, or his own attorneys, covered a wide range of topics, including pop culture, drugs, rap music, jail food, and his reflections on the criminal justice system. With many of his victims' family members present in the courtroom, Aaron moved a bizarre narrative to explain why he found himself facing charges of brutal serial violence against young women. He asserted that the police had conspired to frame him as a part of a cover-up orchestrated by a corrupt medical examiner who was involved in harvesting and selling human organs. He even claimed that his DNA had been manipulated in what he referred to as genetic shuffling. However, the jury did not buy into his elaborate story. On December 16, 2000, when the guilty verdict was delivered, the courtroom burst into cheers. As Aaron was later led past the crowd of grieving relatives, he directed a profane curse at them. During the sentencing a month later, in January 2001, family members of Aaron's victims had the opportunity to speak directly to him. Olga, Paula's mother, addressed him, expressing her wish that he would understand the torment of sleepless nights, loss of appetite, the inability to walk or breathe, and the absence of peace, all the while thinking about her daughter's suffering at the time of her death. Olga spoke of her enduring pain, having brought her daughter to the country in pursuit of the American dream. When it was Aaron's turn to speak at the sentencing hearing, he began to cry and said that he was sorry. In response to this, a male cousin of Johias Castro erupted in anger and attempted to leap over the barrier in an effort to attack Aaron. Following this, Justice Joan Sadalnik delivered the sentence. She imposed 3 life sentences on Aaron, each without the possibility of parole, for the 3 murders. Additionally, he received a 400-year sentence for 4 counts of abuse. Aaron was incarcerated in the Clinton Correctional Facility, located in Dannemora, New York. By the time Aaron was sentenced, lawmakers in New York and many other states had enacted laws requiring DNA testing for individuals arrested in connection with violent crimes. Since then, this testing has been expanded to encompass most felony arrests, spanning both violent and non-violent offenses. Moreover, certain jurisdictions have initiated DNA testing for individuals arrested for misdemeanors. For Olga, the agony of losing Paula remains as raw as ever. She understands all too clearly that the anguish stemming from the sudden and senseless loss of a loved one doesn't fade with time, especially when so many unresolved questions linger. As we conclude this heart-wrenching journey through Paula's tragic story, her memory and that of the other victims lingers in our thoughts. Reflecting on Aaron's actions and consequences he faced, we are left with thought-provoking questions. What drives an individual like Aaron to commit crimes like this? And how can society identify and address the factors that lead to such behavior? Ashley Morris Mallis was born on March 1, 1986 and lived in Muncie, Indiana. She visited her parents in Royerton, Indiana on September 19, 2013. She took her newborn daughter and had dinner with her parents. Her father, Don, noted she seemed slightly worried, but nothing else appeared out of the ordinary. On September 22nd, Ashley attended a family reunion, and this is the last time her family saw her. She was the mother of 3 when she disappeared at the age of 28. At the time of her disappearance, Ashley was separated from her husband and began seeing 62-year-old married man, Daniel York Sr., a mechanic whom she'd met in 2012 when she needed her car serviced. He lent her a vehicle to drive and gave her a rental house to live in. The two began having an affair, and Ashley became pregnant with a baby girl and gave birth just a short period of time prior to her disappearance. The baby Ashley gave birth to was supposedly Daniel Sr., although her paternity had not been verified. It's unclear whether his wife was aware of their affair at the time. Daniel Sr. is described as a manipulator that had a liking to younger women. A few days after the family reunion, Ashley's father and brother were unable to reach her on her phone. Her parents drove to her home and found it locked, and Ashley was nowhere to be found. They left a note on the door asking her to contact them. After a few days passed with no call from Ashley, her parents went back to the house to check on her. The note that they had left was gone. They left a second note in its place and called Daniel Sr. to ask if he knew where she was. He told her parents that she had left to go out of state 2 weeks prior. She had left her sons with her husband and her baby daughter with Daniel and his wife. Her parents then immediately reported her missing because they knew something was not right. Her loved ones don't believe she would have walked out of their life and abandoned her 3 children, all who were under the age of 5. After her disappearance, Ashley's estranged husband petitioned the courts for an emergency custody hearing and gained full custody of both their sons and was granted a divorce. Within a short period of time after Ashley's disappearance, several things had occurred. Daniel Sr. was seen packing up some of Ashley's things at her home and loading them into a truck. It's also believed that Daniel Sr. enlisted his son and possibly his daughter to assist. All the items they took are reported to have been disposed of. Strangely, Daniel's son, Daniel York Jr., had choked on a hamburger in the Yorks' home and passed away shortly after Ashley's disappearance. However, before this happened, Daniel Jr. had supposedly revealed some details pertaining to Ashley's disappearance. When an autopsy was done, they found massive amounts of alcohol in his system that would have been enough to kill him, but they also found a mixture of potent narcotics. It is also reported that he was going through some legal troubles that could potentially cost the family lots of money. You have to wonder if the family saw Daniel Jr. as a liability and his passing was no accident. It is reported that there were several discrepancies in Daniel Sr.'s story regarding Ashley's disappearance. So why wasn't he looked into further? It turns out that he had a cousin, Michael Scroggins, who was a sheriff with the Delaware County Sheriff's Department at the time of Ashley's disappearance. It would appear his cousin might have prevented Daniel Sr. from being looked at thoroughly. Michael Scroggins passed away unexpectedly on May 1535, 1 week after having shoulder surgery. According to reports, he was at his girlfriend's house when he got up in the morning and fell and then died shortly after that. That same year, Daniel Sr. would pass away on September 15, 2015 of a heart attack. Was this family full of bad luck and tragedy, or were more suspicious acts at play here? Before Daniel Sr.'s death, his wife, Sheila, and him had moved to Florida, taking the baby girl with them. After his death, his wife manipulated the legal system in Florida so that she could adopt the baby girl without any consideration given to Ashley's parents. Her parents have not been able to see or contact their granddaughter, nor were they given the option for legal custody, although they are her legal biological grandparents. Interestingly, Daniel Sr. was also considered a person of interest in the death of 22-year-old Heather Music, whose body was found in a burned-out hotel room at the Budget Inn in Daleville, Indiana on November 17, 2010. Daniel had rented the room, and after his initial police interview, he lawyered up and refused to speak with investigators any further. He was never charged in her case, and her murder remains unsolved, and he was also never charged with Ashley's disappearance. Understandably, the families are frustrated and want answers. They want to give Ashley a proper burial as she is believed to be deceased. They also want their granddaughter in their lives and for her to grow up with her family. Her family will not give up on getting justice, and as of today, the case remains unsolved. 36-year-old Renee McRae lived in Inverness, Scotland in 1976. She was married to Gordon McRae, though the two of them were separated. Renee had 2 sons, 9-year-old Gordon and 3-year-old Andrew. She was described as a devoted mother. On November 12th of 1976, Renee left her home with both of her sons. She dropped Gordon at her estranged husband's house. Thereafter, she turned south on the A9, which is a major road in Scotland. The apparent plan was to visit her sister and kill Marnik. That was the last time Renee and her son Andrew were seen alive. Later that same night, A train driver spotted Renee's burning BMW in an isolated lay-by. When the police arrived at the scene of the vehicle, it was charred and empty apart from a rug stained with blood matching Renee's blood type. What followed was an extensive investigation. Renee and Andrew's disappearance became notorious in Scotland. Investigators concluded that the two of them were not alive anymore and that the culprit had made careful plans and had disposed of the bodies without leaving any clues. Witnesses on the A9 reported seeing a man dragging something they thought was a sheep, not far from where the car was found. Interestingly, was reported to have been wearing a sheepskin coat when she disappeared. As police investigated, it became apparent that Renee's personal life was not straightforward. In 1971, unbeknownst to her husband Gordon, Renee began to have an affair with William McDowell. William worked for Gordon McRae as an accountant and company secretary. He was married with 2 children. Nobody knew about the affair except Renee's best friend, Valerie Stevenson. Valerie revealed that Renee had not been planning to visit her sister that night, but intended to travel to Perthshire to visit William McDowell. Investigators also learned that Renee's youngest son, Andrew's father, was McDowell and not her husband, Gordon McRice. Renee had first confided to her friend Valerie about her conducting an affair in spring of 1973 when she had been pregnant with Andrew. William McDowell admitted to their affair, but has not spoken about the case since then, except to deny any involvement. The revelation of Renee's 4-year affair led investigators to admit that the case was mired in a sea of deceit and untruthfulness from the start. Detective Sergeant John Cathcart coordinated the search, and after 8 months he had a breakthrough. While excavating Dalmaguer Quarry, he was hit by a stench after removing a layer of topsoil. He was convinced it was the sign of corpses, so he continued digging. Unfortunately, he was not able to find anything conclusive and the case went cold. In 2004, investigators decided to take another look after a documentary renewed interest in the case throughout Scotland. Also, in 2004, Chief Constable Ian Latimer launched a cold case review, which led to £122,000 being spent on an excavation of Dalmaguer Quarry. Over the course of 3 weeks, in August 2004, 20,000 tons of earth from the quarry had been excavated and 2,000 trees were removed. All that was found were 2 crisp packets, some men's clothing and rabbit bones. By August 2006, £250,000 has been spent reinvestigating the case. More recently, the investigation focused on the possibility that the bodies were buried under the A9 road. The A9 was in the middle of a major program of upgrading at the time of the disappearance. An 80-year-old farmer using his supernatural powers claimed that the bodies were under the A9. He marked the spot with a yellow circle. A spokeswoman from Northern Constabulary said that after studying aerial photographs taken by the Royal Air Force during the construction of the A9, they were satisfied the bodies were not buried under the road. Finally, in September 2019, detectives from Police Scotland's major investigation team arrested 77-year-old William McDowell in connection with the case. In November of 2021, the 80-year-old McDowell was adjudged fit to stand trial, which took place in Inverness in 2022. Then, in September of 2022, more than 45 years after the disappearance, McDowell was found guilty of taking the lives of Renee and Andrew McRae. He was sentenced to a minimum of 30 years in prison. Lots of little pieces of evidence against McDowell was provided during the trial. A witness said McDowell was seen scrubbing the trunk of his car days following Renee and Andrew's disappearance. A convicted criminal said that he was paid cash to douse Renee and Andrew with acid by William McDowell. It was also revealed that McDowell has made 4 statements to the police. In one statement, he admitted that he was responsible but later changes his story. Another witness claimed that she saw a man who she thinks is McDowell in the area Renee's burning car was found. Detective Chief Inspector Brian Geddes had this to say following the conviction: "Renee and Andrew's family and friends have waited decades for justice, and I hope that the outcome in court today provides some form of closure for them. They have carried themselves with absolute dignity throughout, and they are very much in my thoughts today." The case of Grant Hendrickson and Michelle Cartagena. Grant Hendrickson, born on September 20th, 1972, in Macon, Georgia, was an outdoor enthusiast who enjoyed fishing, golf, canoeing, and camping. Like his girlfriend, he was also an active volunteer in the community, having worked at the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Macon since the age of 15. Their active lifestyles likely drew them together. According to those who knew them, Grant's girlfriend, Michelle Cartagena, was born on May 2nd, 1975, in Monterey, California. She was a well-rounded and talented individual. She played in her school's marching orchestra band, was the top singles tennis player, and led her school's softball team. Additionally, she was a member of the National Honor Society. Outside of school, Michelle volunteered with the Red Cross and an animal welfare association, and she often visited elderly people. Her father remembered her as a caring and driven individual who aimed to pursue a career in medicine to help others and give back to society. January 3, 1995, brought a grim discovery to the typically quiet area of Juliet Lake. A passerby reported finding 2 lifeless bodies while walking near the lake. The local sheriff and his deputy responded to the scene, where they were met with a shocking sight. Their office was not accustomed to handling serious crimes, as fights and thefts were the norm. The deputies were not prepared for what they found. A white Honda parked on the lake shore with the body of a man inside and her body lying on the ground nearby. The cause of death was evident even to a non-expert. Both victims had been shot. The car contained the victims' personal belongings, including identification, which revealed the identities of the victims. The male victim was 22-year-old Grant Hendrickson, who was found in the driver's seat. The second victim was 19-year-old Michelle Cartagena. The police were alerted to the incident, and officers from the Major Crimes Unit, along with forensic experts, arrived at the lake. The detective's attention was immediately drawn to Michelle's body, which was partially exposed with her skirt pulled up, suggesting a possible motive for the crime. An examination of the car revealed bullet holes, leading detectives to believe that the perpetrator had opened fire on them while they were inside. Grant was hit by 3 bullets and had no chance of survival. Michelle was shot twice and likely remained conscious as the perpetrator pulled her from the car. The position of Michelle's body, with her legs spread apart, suggested that the perpetrator may have intended to take advantage of her vulnerable state, but did not do so. Forensic experts found a substance on the inside of her thighs, which was later identified as saliva containing chewing tobacco particles. The saliva samples were sent to the lab for further analysis. During the crime scene investigation, police discovered important evidence, including bullet casings of 2 different calibers, 13.223 caliber casings and 4.9mm casings. The presence of 2 types of ammunition suggests that there may have been 2 perpetrators, each using a different weapon. The families of Grant and Michelle were shocked and stunned when they learned about the tragedy. They struggled to comprehend who could have committed such a heinous act against their children. As only children, Grant and Michelle were extremely close to their parents. They had been dating for over a year and had already made plans for their future together, including their upcoming wedding. When detectives couldn't identify any enemies or suspects through family and friends, they began investigating further. They visited Mercer University in Macon, where Grant and Michelle were classmates, to gather more information and piece together the events surrounding the tragedy. The police investigation into the deaths of Michelle and Grant was ongoing, but they had not uncovered any significant leads. Both victims were well-liked and respected at the university, with no known conflicts or enemies. Initially, detectives considered the possibility that the killer might have been a man who had romantic feelings for Michelle and was rejected, but this theory was not substantiated and was eventually set aside. The visit to Mercer University did not yield any useful information for the police. However, by reconstructing the events of January 2nd, the detectives learned that Michelle and Grant had gone to a restaurant, followed by a movie. After the film, they headed to a holiday camp at Juliet Lake. The camp was open to the public 24/7 and featured a boat launch, parking area, small dock, and picnic tables. Since it was a free public space, there was no staff or security present on the night of the crime. Other people were in the area, but they did not report anything suspicious. Some individuals did hear loud noises, which they initially dismissed as firecrackers. A witness reported seeing a 1980s Honda CRX speeding out of the parking lot. Meanwhile, investigators found a DNA sample in saliva on Michelle's thigh. However, at the time, DNA technology was still in its early stages. The DNA Identification Act, which allowed the FBI to create a national DNA database, was not passed until 1994. As a result, there was no database to compare the DNA sample to, and it could only be matched by directly comparing it to the perpetrator's DNA. The investigation also included questioning staff at the restaurant and cinema that Grant and Michelle visited before their deaths, but nothing suspicious was found. The authorities considered the possibility that they might have been random victims or had a chance encounter with someone who became violent. The detectives found no evidence of any other motives, as they had good grades, no connections to shady individuals, and did not use illicit substances. The fact that the perpetrator left behind valuables, including money, suggests that the motive behind the crime was not financial gain, but rather something else. Forensic analysis revealed that the likely weapons used in the crime were an AR-15 rifle and a 9mm Ruger pistol. Despite questioning over 100 individuals and collecting DNA samples from several dozen potential suspects, the investigation had stalled. More than a year and a half after the crime, Agent Randy Upton of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation took over the case in the fall of 1996. Randy adopted a new approach, shifting his focus from identifying the perpetrator to locating the weapon used in the crime. He visited the largest gun store in Macon and requested a list of customers who had purchased an AR-15 rifle between 1985 and 1995. Investigator Randy started contacting individuals on the list of 108 potential suspects. He explained to them that cooperating by allowing their weapon to be inspected and providing a DNA sample would greatly aid the investigation. Most of the people Randy spoke with agreed to comply, which led to the experts conducting further tests. As a result, the list of suspects began to dwindle. On November 27, 1996, Randy contacted Andrew Allen Cook, a 22-year-old who was on the list. During their conversation, Randy informed Andrew of the purpose of the call and asked permission to examine his rifle. However, Andrew claimed he no longer owned the rifle, stating that he had sold it in April 1994, nearly a year before the victims, Grant and Michelle, died. Nonetheless, gun store records showed that this was not possible as Andrew had actually purchased the rifle in August 1994. Agent Randy became suspicious when Andrew lied to him. When Randy asked Andrew for a DNA sample, Andrew claimed he needed to discuss it with his father simultaneously, an FBI agent, before complying. Instead, Andrew hung up. This evasive behavior made Randy think that Andrew might be the person he was searching for. Investigations revealed that 5 months after Grant and Michelle's murders in 1995, Andrew pawned his rifle at a local gun store. Additionally, in December 1993, someone had bought a Ruger pistol on Andrew's behalf because he was underage at the time. Andrew sold this pistol to a friend in July 1995, shortly after pawning his rifle. This sequence of events suggested that Andrew's decision to get rid of both his rifle and pistol within 6 months of the murders was unlikely to be a coincidence. As the police gathered more information about Andrew, they became increasingly confident that they were on the right track. Further investigation revealed that Andrew had not only disposed of his firearms, but also his 1987 Honda CRX, which matched the description of a car seen near the crime scene. Agent Randy decided to visit the diaper factory where Andrew worked. Although Andrew was absent, Randy spoke with one of his co-workers. A colleague of Andrew's reported that they had recently discussed the worst things they had ever done, and Andrew claimed to have shot someone with a rifle. The colleague was skeptical but asked Andrew why he had done it, and Andrew replied that he wanted to see if he could get away with it. The colleague also mentioned that Andrew was a frequent user of chewing tobacco. Another friend testified that Andrew had told him in late November 1996 that he needed to leave town because things were getting hot. These coincidences caught the attention of Agent Randy, who began searching for Andrew Cook, who had not lived with his parents for several years. On December 4, 1996, Agent Randy met with Andrew's father, John, who was also an FBI agent with 29 years of experience. Agent Randy explained that he was investigating the crime at Juliet Lake and wanted to speak with Andrew, but couldn't find him. John was familiar with the case of Grant and Michelle from the news, but had not been involved in the investigation. He told Agent Randy that he didn't consider Andrew a suspect. John Cook's world was turned upside down when his son revealed a shocking truth. A detective had been searching for Andrew in connection with a crime at Juliet Lake, and John had asked his son if he knew anything about it. Andrew's response was devastating. "Daddy, I'm not telling you. You're one of them. You're a cop." John's next question was laced with hope that his son would deny any involvement. "Were you the one who did the shooting?" he asked. After a brief pause, Andrew confirmed his worst fears, saying yes. Andrew explained that he had been fishing at Juliet Lake on the night of the incident. A couple had arrived, and he had gotten into an argument with the driver, Grant. According to Andrew, Grant had threatened him with a pistol, prompting Andrew to grab his rifle and commit an irreversible act. John urged his son to turn himself into the authorities, but Andrew refused, saying he would rather disappear. John was stunned by his son's confession, but he maintained his professional composure. The next day, he visited the Monroe County Sheriff's Office and reported his son's confession. At the time, no one was aware that Andrew had been arrested earlier that morning in a nearby county for illegally hunting deer in Turkey. He had given a false name, but his true identity was quickly discovered by Agent Randy. Randy then traveled to Jones County to speak with Andrew. Unbeknownst to Randy, Andrew had already confessed everything to his father the day before. When Randy arrived at the Jones County Sheriff's Office, he introduced himself and asked Andrew if he would be willing to answer a few questions. Andrew responded, "It's been 2 years and you still don't have any evidence. I used to own a Honda, a rifle, and a Ruger, but now you're just trying to frame me." Andrew told the sheriff that if they helped his father get a lawyer, he would reveal the entire truth. After being transferred to Monroe County, Andrew's father, John, was allowed a private conversation with him. When John hugged his son, both men broke down in tears. Andrew confessed to his father that he wasn't at the lake to fish on the night of the crime. Instead, he claimed to have arrived after the victims, Grant and Michelle, were already there. Andrew's story went that he had fired multiple shots from his rifle, then used his pistol to fire additional shots. He then pulled Michelle's body out of the car in an attempt to mislead the police. As an extra precaution, Andrew spat on Michelle to prevent the police from linking him to the crime through saliva analysis. Andrew was subsequently charged with the murders of Grant Hendrickson and Michelle Cartagena. The police gathered additional evidence to support his confession, including tracing the ownership of the rifle and pistol used in the crime. Forensic examination of the guns confirmed that they were indeed the ones used to kill Michelle and Grant. Andrew Cook's DNA was matched to the saliva found on Michelle's body, further implicating him in the crime. The trial took place in 1998, during which John Andrew, Andrew's father, spoke and apologized to the families of the victims, Grant and Michelle. He acknowledged that his apologies would not bring them peace and expressed regret for not recognizing the evil that had consumed his son. Andrew Cook was found guilty on March 19, 1998, and was sentenced to death. He exhausted all his appeals, and the execution was scheduled for February 22, 2013. However, 3 days before the scheduled execution, Andrew's attorneys filed a clemency appeal, arguing that he was mentally unstable and required treatment. The State Board of Pardons and Paroles considered the appeal but ultimately voted against clemency. On February 22, 2013, Andrew Cook's family visited him in prison to bid their final farewell. Before his execution, he was granted the opportunity to choose his last meal, which consisted of a steak, baked potatoes, fried shrimp, lemon pie, and soda. As he lay strapped to a gurney in the death chamber, Andrew delivered his final words, expressing remorse for his actions. "I'm sorry," he said. "I won't ask you to forgive me, as I struggle to forgive myself." He then thanked his family for their unwavering support and apologized for the pain he had caused them, stating, "I'm sorry I took so much from you all." At 11:08 p.m., the lethal injection was administered. 14 minutes later, Andrew Cook, 38, was pronounced dead. Following the execution, Mary Hendrickson, the mother of one of the victims, expressed relief that justice had finally been served after 18 long years. The city of Weatherford in Texas, home to the Kyla family. James Craig Kyla, who went by Craig, his wife Karen, their 2 daughters, 18-year-old Emily and 16-year-old Lauren, and a son, 10-year-old Sean. Karen and Craig had been together for many years. Craig was in his last year of his engineering degree at Kansas State University when he met Karen, who was in her first year. They were both ambitious and bright students and shared a lot in common. Friends said that they were the couple everyone was always trying to live up to, and everyone knew they would be successful when they graduated. They soon married and had their first daughter, Emily, and in 1999, an opportunity came along. Craig was offered the job of utility director of Weatherford, Texas. It was not only a very well-paying job, but a well-respected one too. They settled into a nice home and had 2 more children, Lauren and Sean. Neighbors said they were a key part of the community, always involved with everything and keen to welcome new people to the area, with Karen often baking cakes and making food for everyone. Emily attended the St. Louis College of Pharmacy and Lauren was an honor student at a Columbia high school. The teens were also in a band where they both played and sang, often showcasing their talents around town. Neighbors said that, as cliché as it sounded, they really were the all-American family, and a lot of people in the area really admired them. But all was not as it seemed. One day, Karen's sister Lynn got a call. Karen wanted to confide in her about the true state of their marriage. She told Lynn that over the years Craig had changed. He had started giving her curfews and an allowance, which he supervised and scrutinized, demanding to see receipts for all of her purchases, even everyday things like food. He would demand sex every night at 8 p.m. exactly, and everything she did in the house had a timer on it. She said she did everything he asked to keep the peace. But things were getting worse and she felt trapped and scared. Karen told her sister she wanted to look for an outlet, something that was just hers that he couldn't control. She decided to join a local gym around the children's school hours and Craig being at work. Friends said that she was soon there so much and keen to learn. She was eventually hired as a fitness instructor. A completely different career path, but something she was excited to do. To her surprise, when Craig found out she had been going, he approved, telling her as long as she was home on time to look after the children, there would be no issues. One day at the gym, Karen bumped into Sonny Reese, another personal trainer. From the get-go, the pair were inseparable. They had a lot in common and spent all their shifts together. Before long, a romantic relationship developed, and the couple began an affair. Lynn said that she felt like her sister was so mentally beaten down at that point, when she found someone that seemed to really care about her and didn't want to control her. The relationship just fell together naturally. Karen knew she had to come clean and tell Craig everything. To her total shock, Craig did not seem to have an issue with it. Far from it, in fact. He encouraged it and started messaging Sonny, sending her flowers and asking her for a threesome. People say he saw it as an opportunity to spice up their marriage and sex life. He told Karen he didn't have any problem with it, as long as he was included and she didn't leave him. But Karen and Sonny wanted no part of the throuple he was suggesting. They wanted it to just be them. Craig was embarrassed, and now he knew there was no chance of bringing Sonny into the marriage. He wanted her out completely, and the affair to stop. But Karen and Sonny continued to see each other, and it seemed that Karen was now well and truly out of the marriage. After a few months, Craig decided the best way to put a stop to it was to move the family out of town. Started looking for a career change elsewhere that would allow this to happen. He got another job in Columbia, Missouri, one that saw him become the highest paid employee in the city. And in June 2008, the family all moved out there. Craig hoped that things would return to normal, and as Karen and Sonny were now almost 700 miles apart, he felt confident the affair would come to an end. But it didn't. Karen and Sonny's relationship continued long distance. They would email and call and text each other and sneak visits halfway where they could. Safe to say Karen and Craig's marriage was now in a very bad and toxic place. For New Year's Eve, the Kahlers attended a party back in Weatherford. Many neighbors were in attendance, including Sonny. At various points during the party, some guests saw Sonny and Karen together, and it was glaringly obvious that something was going on. It had gone from being a secret between Craig, Karen, and Sonny to a very public and open thing. Craig was mortified, and a huge fight broke out between him and Karen, one that carried on as soon as they left. Karen said Craig pushed her so hard she smashed her head on the street. Friends said it was awful. The atmosphere had soured and everyone was talking about Craig and Karen. A matter of days later, Karen told Craig she was filing for a divorce, started the legal proceedings, and moved into the spare room. Craig spent hours calling Karen's family and friends, one day asking them to convince her not to go ahead with the divorce, and the next telling them she was leaving him for another woman and wanted to steal all his money and take the children. Sonny started contacting Craig directly, telling him to leave Karen alone and that she was never happy with him anyway. As March 2009 rolled around, escalated even more, and after another fight became physical, Craig was arrested. He told police that he had hugged Karen tightly and that she had resisted. Karen said he had violently grabbed her, giving her bruises. She gave a statement which read, "Over time, it has become apparent that Craig is controlling. I have learned along the way that he is capable of using force. The issues vary, but I figured out how to keep things from becoming ugly. When money was a problem, I wouldn't tell him what things, groceries, clothing, etc. cost. When it was about sex, I decided it was easier to give him what he wanted every night than to refuse. On occasions I would refuse. He has been known to be forceful and mean. I'm afraid it will escalate so far that someone is going to be seriously hurt." She pressed charges and she and the children moved out of the house completely. People said this was when Craig became even more reclusive and erratic. He no longer wanted anything to do with Lauren and Emily and only wanted to see his son Sean, saying he felt his daughters had failed him by taking their mother's side. This was made even worse when Lauren and Emily said they accepted Sonny and were happy to see their mother happy. Craig was enraged. He referred to his daughters as rotting corpses. Friends said that he started stalking Karen and spying on her, getting into the house to install cameras and hacking into her emails. Police were then called to the house again when Karen found out that Craig had slashed her car tires and was ripping out cables from outside the house. Craig soon started slipping at work, choosing to show his colleagues family albums over and over and leaving work unannounced to see what Karen was doing. Given everything that was going on, Craig's manager Bill quietly asked him to resign in September of 2009. This had affected his focus on the department in a way that is not likely to change in the near future. His boss said. Craig was paid 2 months' salary and 1 month of severance. And with any other job prospects looking unlikely, Craig moved back in with his parents. They were now legally separated. He still owed Karen over $3,000 a month in child support. Flash forward to Thanksgiving 2009 and Karen, Emily, Lauren and Sonny spent the holidays at Lynn's house. 10-year-old Sean, however, spent it with Craig. But Karen wanted all her children and Sonny to visit her grandmother Dorothy during the holiday period too. So the next day she went over to pick Sean up and make the trip over. 89-year-old Dorothy lived in a quiet little farmhouse in a city of less than 1,000 people, Burlingame, Kansas. Despite Karen and Craig's many arguments and fights about the affair, a contentious pending divorce, questions about where the children would live, and issues with finances, Karen said she was hopeful that a resolution would soon be found. Craig was just days away from going to court in regards to the incident several months earlier, and a hearing had been scheduled for January to start going through the divorce. As soon as the holiday period was over, everybody was optimistic that things might start to move forward more amicably. Saturday, November 29th, 2009. Deputy Sheriff Nathan Perling was finishing up some paperwork in his office when a call came in about a suspicious vehicle in Burlingame. It was just after 6 p.m. and the neighbor reported that a small truck was speeding around near their house. They had watched as the man pulled up, exited the vehicle and started walking down the road. The couple then saw him come back carrying a large object that they could not identify. Thinking he was stealing, they grabbed a flashlight and headed outside to confront him. He placed the object in the back seat, got back inside and drove off just as they approached him. Deputy Perling set off to see what was going on, but just a couple of minutes later, another call came in over the radio. It was coming from the same area, but this time it was far more alarming. No sooner had they received this harrowing call when a third person called in. They had opened their front door to find a 10-year-old child crying and asking for help. It was Sean Kaler. He said he needed help at Dorothy White's house as there had been a shooting. Officers said they knew it was going to be a bad scene, but nothing quite prepared them for what they would ultimately find. When they entered the home, the first person they found was 89-year-old Dorothy. She was bleeding profusely on the kitchen floor and had been shot several times. She was still alive, but barely. They then found Karen Kaler in the dining area. She had been shot twice and she was already dead. 18-year-old Emily was found behind the couch in the lounge and had also been shot twice, with the second shot likely paralyzing her instantly. She too was deceased and police determined she was likely trying to hide as the gunman was inside. Deputy Sheriff Perling then heard a faint voice calling for help from the upstairs. It was Lauren. Just like Dorothy, she was alive but only just. As Dorothy and Lauren were taken away, Lauren turned to an officer and said, "Craig." He said, "Who's that?" "My dad," she said. Dorothy identified Craig as the shooter as well. Tragically, Lauren succumbed to her injuries first and was pronounced dead shortly after getting to the hospital. Dorothy was still fighting for her life, but sadly, it wasn't looking hopeful. There was one more person left who had been there, Sean, and little did the authorities realize he had witnessed a lot. Sean said he had been cleaning some old coins that he and Karen had found. As the two of them were stood at the sink, Craig entered the house via the back door holding a rifle and shot at Karen. Sean said he ducked down and just ran as fast as he could to get out the back door. He then ran around to the front door, hoping to get back in and get to her phone. He carefully opened the door, hearing more shots ring out as he did so. He saw Craig walking around, and he closed the door and ran for help instead. Police had already put out an alert to try and locate Craig. A resident then spotted someone abandoning their vehicle in the middle of nowhere and running down a deserted road. She called in with the tip. They found the vehicle and it matched the description of the one the neighbors had seen earlier that night and felt confident it was Craig's. A search of the vehicle found more ammunition and some unopened anxiety medications. A backpack was also found with some soap, towels, toilet paper, cotton balls, and some canned food. But Craig was nowhere to be found. After 8 hours of searching, Craig Kaler was finally located. It was now about 7 a.m. and he was wandering on the side of the road, looking confused, lost, and disheveled. He knew it was coming. and turned to the officers and said, "I'm the guy you're looking for." He told them that he was armed with a revolver as well as some pocket knives. They also found hundreds of dollars in cash, some gloves, a flashlight, and a hunting bag. He was arrested without incident and taken to the station. Craig was fairly open and told the detectives a lot. He also told him about the New Year's Eve party and how the pair would sneak visits out of town. He said he was particularly upset when he realized that his daughters not only approved, but were traveling with Karen to meet Sonny as well. Craig Kaler was charged with first-degree murder and aggravated burglary. His bail was set at $10 million. Just after 4 p.m. on December 1st, Dorothy White sadly passed away too. In December 2010, he had his preliminary trial where he entered a plea of insanity, the only defense against capital murder. His lawyers claimed that he had had a mental breakdown due to Karen's affair. They said this, coupled with the loss of his job and having to move in with his parents, had only added fuel to the fire. They said that the unopened medication in his car, ongoing erratic behavior, and the fact he did not attempt to cover up what he had done was evidence that he was not of a sound state of mind, that his plea of insanity was fair. In 1995, the state of Kansas passed a law which revoked the traditional insanity defense. The new law stated that defendants could no longer argue that, because of mental health issues, they were incapable of deciding right from wrong. Instead, defendants suffering from mental health issues were still legally responsible for a crime unless these mental health issues prevented them from forming an intent to commit or act with premeditation. His defense team argued that his mental health issues were so severe that it proved he had not premeditated anything. It was a total snap in that moment. At the time of the murders, his lawyers said that he was suffering from depression, hallucinations, and had obsessive-compulsive, narcissistic, and histrionic personality disorders. But the prosecution argued that it was definitely premeditated, and his behavior over the last year especially showed that this was all just building up to what he ultimately wanted to do, which was kill his wife and likely anyone else that stood in the way of that. Their expert psychiatrist stated that while Craig had clinical depression, he was still capable of planning the murders. They also pointed to the fact that Craig had not killed their son Sean, even though he was stood right there, showing this was a conscious decision. This was not someone that was out of control and had snapped in the moment. And after this, they brought in their star witness, Sean Kaler, who was now 12 years old. And one can only imagine how difficult this must have been for him. He appeared via a video link to bravely tell everybody what had happened. People in the court said that Sean was clear, concise, and unwavering, a child far more mature than his years. "My dad came through the door and shot my mom. I just heard her collapse on the floor from the shot. I just caught a glimpse. I think she was holding her leg," Sean recalled. Some people in the courtroom said that the pictures of the crime scene were so bad they physically had to look away, with some even crying. The prosecution spoke about the many allegations of abuse and controlling behaviors and said this again proved his intention to hurt was always there, and when he finally lost complete control when they all moved out is when things escalated even more. Suni Reese also testified. She described Karen and Craig's relationship as very abusive, saying she wanted to protect Karen from him. She also said that Craig was more than happy for her and Karen to start a relationship and showed no signs of being bothered by it until he had to let Karen go. But she acknowledged that she had no physical evidence to prove this. It was all what she remembered and what she had heard from Karen. On August 25, 2011, after just 2 hours, the jury had reached a unanimous verdict. Craig Kaler was found guilty of capital murder and his pleas of insanity were not believed. This meant he would face the death penalty or life without parole. There were many victim impact statements given. Sean gave a small statement too and said, "I do not want my dad to receive the death penalty because it would be hard on my grandparents. I do not want my whole family gone." After this, another week would pass while everyone waited to hear the results of the sentencing. Upon hearing he was sentenced to death, those in the courtroom said Craig Kaler had no reaction, no remorse, no sadness, and no regret. The prosecutor said he only ever seemed to look proud of himself, often smirking and muttering sarcastic comments. As he exited the courtroom to begin his time, he shouted to his mother and father, "Take care of Sean so he's not raised by a bunch of freaks." While on death row, Craig started writing letters to various people, including the lead prosecutor. He still showed no remorse, instead saying he felt a sense of relief for what had happened, as he was able to free Sean. His team appealed to the Kansas Supreme Court, citing numerous complaints, including the belief that there had been misconduct on the jury. They also stated that his mental health and insanity plea had not been taken into consideration. One judge said, "Kansas, unlike many states, will not wholly exonerate a defendant on the ground that his illness prevented him from recognizing his criminal act as morally wrong. Another judge added that, contrary to Kayla's view, Kansas takes account of mental health at both trial and sentencing. It has just not adopted the particular insanity defense Kayla would like. His appeal was denied. With this ruling, Craig Kaler had now exhausted his direct appeals, but further appeals were still possible. And in January 2023, another appeal was lodged, which might be his last chance. Lynn and Sonny started organized runs in Weatherford in honor of Karen to raise money for victims of domestic violence, and the community often comes together to remember the family and all the lives that were lost that night. According to sources, Sean went into the care of the state for a while before going to live with his grandmother and grandfather. He graduated high school and now works in Kansas. It was a case that left a community shocked and hurting. 3 generations snatched away in a matter of minutes. And for Sean, who not only lost his mother, sisters, and great-grandmother in the most awful way, but witnessed it all as well, and then essentially lost his father too, it is incomprehensibly heartbreaking. How he has come through it all despite everything is remarkable and a testament to his strength and perseverance against so many odds. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No, on the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends, and the young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention, and secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique, and all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals, and in it, he was considered a strong man, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children, and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children and, luckily, they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed to his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity. Despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time, Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was, or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room. "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing the criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow. What was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too? Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open, and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually, burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved, especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play. Tom really was suspicious that evening," said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house, go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own. So she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that. So at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him. And for some reason, he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife. And he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly. But he didn't simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece. That Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with 2 women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things. And if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the 3rd and 4th time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you? Or haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end. But I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go. But the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say. And for this work, he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping. But the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door. And when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck. But it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. "I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her," says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did. After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who in fact served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. And who killed her? The detective asked. I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer, Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination. And the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house, but Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28th of 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Bird. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body, that's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Bird was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there. and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister Kim. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. On August 16, 1963, an elderly couple stopped to pick some flowers along Rockwood Street in Mount Pleasant, a suburb of Perth, Western Australia, when they discovered a rifle hidden amongst some nearby bushes. They notified the police, who collected the weapon and performed ballistics tests on it. These tests showed that the rifle was the weapon used in the murder of Shirley MacLeod, an 18-year-old student who had been killed by a single shot to her head while she was babysitting at a house on Wobble Road in Dalkeith. The discovery of the rifle was the best lead police had in the case, and they decided to use it to lay a trap for Shirley's killer. Hoping he would come back to retrieve the murder weapon, they replaced it with a different but similar rifle, which had been modified so that it could not be used. They tied the rifle to the bushes using fishing line and set up surveillance. Police spent over 2 weeks watching the bushes from a nearby camouflage tent. On September 1st, just after 1 a.m., a car pulled up near the bushes. The driver exited the vehicle, walked up to the bushes, and reached for the butt of the rifle. The 2 police officers watching from nearby ran out from their hiding spot and wrestled the man to the ground. The man was Eric Edgar Cook, a 32-year-old father of 7 who was known to police because of several arrests for thefts and burglaries. He initially told the officers who apprehended him that he had come to collect the rifle, but not because he had left it there. He claimed he had seen the weapon in the bushes the previous Thursday and had come back for it. He had been observed driving up near the bushes the previous Thursday without getting out of his car, but was still brought into custody. While in custody, Cook would ultimately confess to 8 murders and 14 attempted murders. He also admitted to breaking into over 250 homes in Perth. His crimes varied in mode and method, and all of his crimes were not previously connected due to these differences. His first admitted act of serious violence was in September of 1958 when he ran down a woman riding a bicycle with a stolen car. When asked why he had done this, Cook replied, "I just wanted to hurt someone and she was it for the night." While his crimes would remain varied, stealing cars and running down individuals of opportunity would remain one of his preferred acts of violence. Cook said that he committed his first murder in January of 1959 when he stabbed Penina Bergman to death with a diving knife in her South Perth home. She left behind an 8-year-old son, who had been spending the night with Penina's former landlords, who remained close friends with her and watched her son on nights when she would go out for the evening. Cook also confessed to one of Australia's most shocking crimes of 1963, a seemingly random spree of shootings around the western suburbs of Perth in the early morning hours of January 27th, just as the country finished celebrating Australia Day. 5 people were shot, 3 of whom did not survive. The then unidentified perpetrator of these various crimes was referred to as the Nightcaller and the Nedlands Monster in various media reports. Cook was able to provide extremely detailed accounts of his crimes, even remembering the exact denominations of the coins and bills he stole from some of the hundreds of homes he robbed, and new information about several of the crimes he claimed responsibility for that the police had not released to the public. While Cook's confessions seemingly solved numerous unsolved cases, they also created a major problem, because 2 of the crimes he confessed to were already considered solved and 2 other men were serving time for committing them. In December of 1959, 22-year-old Gillian Brewer, an heiress to the Robertson family fortune, was killed in a brutal attack with both a tomahawk and a pair of dressmaking scissors in her apartment in Cotslow. 2 years later, a profoundly deaf and mute man named Daryl Beamish, who had been just 18 years old at the time of the murder, was found guilty of the crime and sentenced to death. Police claimed to have obtained 4 confessions to the murder from Daryl. 2 he gave using sign language through an interpreter, 1 was in a written statement, and another was found written in the exercise yard at the facility where he was being held. Daryl claimed that the confessions had been coerced and were the result of intimidation and assault by police. John Button had spent the day of his 19th birthday with his girlfriend, 17-year-old Rosemary Anderson, in February of 1963. They returned to his parents' home that evening and ate fish and chips while watching television with John's brother Jim. Out of the corner of his eye, John saw a hand reach over to take some of his fish and, assuming that it was his brother, said to leave it alone. It had not been Jim but Rosemary, who was annoyed that John was so quick to anger and chastise her over a piece of fish. She walked out of the house to return home, with John following behind her. He drove alongside her as she walked down the street, apologizing and asking her to get in the car and come back to the house with him. She refused and continued walking home. John eventually pulled over and smoked a cigarette, hoping that if he gave Rosemary a few minutes, she would calm down. He began driving down the route Rosemary would take home again, but when Rosemary came back into his view, she was no longer walking. John found her lying unconscious on the side of the road surrounded by blood. John put Rosemary in the car and drove her to the nearby home of her family doctor, who ran a medical practice adjacent to his home. The doctor called for an ambulance and accompanied Rosemary to the hospital while John waited for the police. When police arrived, John explained to them what had happened. They questioned John about a dent on the front of his car, which he told them was the result of a small accident 3 weeks earlier. He had run into the back of a Ford Prefect, and an accident report on the incident was on file. He then went with the police to show them where he had found Rosemary. He asked the police to take him to the hospital to see Rosemary, but they took him to the police station to question him instead. It not until he was in the interrogation room that John, who had been focused solely on Rosemary and her condition, realized that the police believed that he had hit Rosemary with his car. The police told him that they knew he had hit Rosemary and asked him to tell them what had really happened. John continued to tell them what had happened that night, and the police grew frustrated. According to John, they punched him in the stomach several times. 5 hours into the interrogation, they informed John that Rosemary had passed away. Intimidated by violence, distraught over Rosemary's death, and wanting the interrogation to be over so he could mourn the loss of his girlfriend, John eventually told the police that he would say whatever they wanted him to say. They gave him a statement claiming responsibility for striking Rosemary with his car, and he signed it. John was charged with willful murder and remanded to the death row wing at Fremantle Prison. During the 3 months he spent there before his trial, he was only allowed to see his parents and his lawyers. When he told his lawyer about the coerced confession, he was told that he would be hanged if he made such allegations against the police in court. John's trial lasted a week, with the confession and the dent on his car serving as major aspects of the prosecution's case. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. When they announced their verdict, the foreman initially announced that they found John not guilty of both willful murder and the lesser charge of manslaughter, but then realized that he had misspoken and announced that the jury had found John guilty of manslaughter. Being found guilty of manslaughter rather than willful murder spared John from the death penalty, but earned him a sentence of 10 years hard labor. He was assigned to the prison carpentry crew, where Daryl Beamish was also working. A fellow inmate told John that Daryl was also innocent of the crime he was incarcerated for, and John eventually learned enough sign language to be able to communicate with Daryl and tried to determine if he really was in the same situation he now found himself in. He eventually learned that Daryl's confessions had also been obtained through intimidation and was convinced of his innocence. John was approximately 6 months into his sentence when he heard the news of Cook's confessions, including the ones to the crimes he and Daryl were currently incarcerated for. He told Daryl that he thought their ordeal would be over within a few days. It was not. John's lawyer filed an appeal, but the judge refused to allow Cook's confession to be used as evidence, arguing that Cook must have been lying. Daryl Beamish would also appeal his sentence several times in light of this new evidence. Cook gave evidence at one of these appeal hearings in 1964, but the judge called the account of the murder utterly worthless and dismissed confession because Cook was a palpable and unscrupulous liar. Despite confessing to so many crimes, Eric Edgar Cook was only tried for one, as a single conviction for willful murder could get him the death penalty. He was charged with killing John Sturkey, an 18-year-old Queen Scout who was preparing to move east to accept a scholarship from the Department of Agriculture to study veterinary science. He had been shot once in the head while he slept on the veranda of a student boarding house on Vincent Street in Nedlands during the Australia Day spree. Cook was convicted and sentenced to death on November 27, 1963. Cook continued maintaining that he had killed both Rosemary Anderson and Gillian Brewer right up until his death. 15 minutes prior to his execution, he took the Bible out of the hands of the minister waiting with him and swore on it that he had killed both women. Cook was hanged at Fremantle Prison on October 26, 1964, becoming the last man to be hanged in Western Australia. Daryl Beamish's death sentence was reduced to life in prison, and he was ultimately released from custody in 1977, having served 15 years. John Button was released on parole after serving 5.5 years of his 10-year sentence. He moved into a small apartment with his parents, who had to sell their house and spend all of their savings to pay for their son's legal fees. While John was no longer incarcerated, his conviction still hung over him, affecting him in terms of his mental health and in very concrete, practical ways. John's time in prison limited his ability to work. In addition, John's mother was eventually diagnosed with cancer, and she and John's father moved to England for treatment. Because of his criminal record, John was unable to visit them there. He applied for an exemption when his mother's health declined so that he could see her one final time, but she passed away before the exemption was approved. In 1992, journalist Estelle Blackburn learned of John Button and Daryl Beamish's cases. She spent the next several years investigating and published a book on the case in 1998 called Broken Lives. The success of the book led to increased media attention on and public interest in the cases. Lawyers, other journalists, and forensic experts took interest in and became involved with the cases, and new evidence was uncovered. All of these combined efforts eventually resulted in John and Daryl being able to file new appeals. John Button's appeal went to court in 2002. The court would not allow Eric Edgar Cook's confession to the murder as evidence, but it did allow his widow, Sally, to testify to the numerous confessions to Rosemary's murder Cook had made to her, and permit John's lawyers to use a 1964 affidavit given by Cook describing how he had hit Rosemary to compare the details Cook provided with the findings of new accident reconstructions, which were videotaped and shown in court. The new reconstructions were performed by expert Rusty Haight, who found that the impact damage caused by hitting a pedestrian was not present on the Simca John had been driving at the time. 3 vintage Simcas were used in the reconstructions, striking a biomedical human form dummy at varying speeds. None of them showed the damage present on the front of John Simca that he had attributed to his earlier accident, and all of them had damage to their hoods that was not present on John Simca. Haight also found that even if Rosemary had been struck with a Simca, she would not have been killed or even sustained serious injury. She also would not have ended up so far off the road where new witness testimony confirmed she had landed after being hit. Haight also performed a reconstruction of the events as described in Cook's affidavit. Cook claimed that he stole a 1962 Holden that night. He saw Rosemary down the road, waited for traffic to clear, and turned the car to line up with her. He struck her at a speed somewhere between 35–40 miles per hour, sending her body over the car's hood and roof. One major reason the appeal judges believed Cook's account to be a fabrication in 1964 was the lack of damage to a metal sun visor that had been present on the Holden. They held that a body could not have been thrown over the vehicle, as Cook described, without hitting the visor, and that Cook's account therefore must have been a lie. He told in an attempt to delay his execution. When Haight reconstructed the events as described in Cook's affidavit, the sun visor did play a role in his findings, but not in the way the judges had assumed it would have almost 40 years earlier. The dummy flew over the car as Cook had described. It did hit the visor, which caused it to fly further out to the side than it had during the reconstructions with the Simcas, causing it to land at a distance more consistent with where Rosemary's body had been found. The sun visor was slightly distorted, but it sprung easily back into place without so much as its paint cracking, leaving no sign of the impact. Detailed photographs of John Button's Simca were available, but there was no way to examine the car Cook claimed he used to kill Rosemary or any of the damage left on it. According to Cook's affidavit, after running Rosemary down, he drove the stolen to Kings Park and crashed it into a tree in an effort to disguise the damage Rosemary's body had left on the vehicle. The car's owner was able to verify this fact, testifying that his Holden had been found crashed into a tree in Kings Park that morning. There were no photographs of the crashed car available, only a report from a panel shop that repaired it. However, based on the results of his reconstructions, he was able to testify that John Button's Simca could not have been used in Rosemary's murder, and that could have occurred just as Eric Edgar Cook had described. Further important testimony at the appeal came from Trevor Condren, the police crash examiner who had inspected John's car after Rosemary's murder. He testified that he had been able to tell that was not the one used in the crime, but had been prevented from testifying to that in court. He further testified that there had been no blood, tissue, or fabric fibers found on the Simca. In 2002, the appeals court accepted Cook as Rosemary Anderson's killer, and John Button's manslaughter conviction was overturned. Western Australia's Court of Criminal Appeal began hearing Daryl Beamish's 6th appeal in October of 2004 on what would have been Gillian Brewer's 67th birthday. His lawyers were allowed to argue this new appeal based on 4 other attacks on women in their homes in the late 1950s, early 1960s. These attacks were later attributed to Cook in the state. Daryl's lawyers argued that if the jury at the original trial had been made aware of these other attacks committed by someone else, and the similarities they showed to Gillian Brunner's murder, they would have delivered a different verdict. Documents corroborating Cook's confession to Gillian's murder were also submitted to the court, and 3 of the 4 women testified about their attacks. In April of 2005, Daryl's conviction was overturned. While previous appeals judges had dismissed Cook's confessions to Gillian's murder as lies, the judges in this appeal accepted his final admission of guilt, writing, "It seems to us that Cook had no good reason for lying in the course of making the gallows confession," in their judgment. After the decision was announced, Daryl thanked his family, legal team, and friends. He also highlighted the bravery of Cook's family, in particular his widow Sally and his oldest son Tony, in their efforts to help him. Tony was present in court when the decision was announced and said afterwards that the gap between the law and justice has finally been closed. John Button was also in the courtroom that day to see his friend finally receive justice, as he had 3 years earlier. Daryl Beamish initially resisted efforts by his legal team to get him to ask the government for compensation for his wrongful imprisonment. Ultimately, however, he decided that extra financial security was important for the care of his wife, Barbara, whose health was failing. She was also beginning to lose her eyesight, which made it difficult for the couple to communicate as Daryl lied on sign language. In June of 2011, the Western Australian government awarded him an ex gratia payment of $425,000. John Button also received an ex gratia payment of $460,000 in June of 2003. He now works with the Innocence Project, training law students to work on wrongful conviction cases, and he and his wife Helen have moved to New South Wales to be closer to their grandchildren.